Okay, good morning again. My name is Noelle Hicks. I'm an associate attorney at Roberts Markell Weinberg Butler Haley in our Houston office. Welcome today to our presentation about leading an efficient neighborhood watch program. I'll just give a brief introduction for myself. Again, I'm an associate in our Property Owners Association department. I handle a lot of the collection and deed restriction enforcement cases, some litigation. So some of you may have gotten an email or a phone call from me sometime in the past. You'll certainly get one from me in the future. Here's a little disclaimer for our presentation today. So this information is presented based on the law as it exists today, August 25th. This is not for legal advice or anything like that, but it's definitely just for educational purposes. Of course, if you need legal advice after our presentation is over with today, make sure that you consult with your attorney. So I want to go over the presentation goals, and essentially today we're talking about the do's and don'ts of neighborhood watch programs. And of course, crime is a real concern in many residential neighborhoods, and often members will come to the association with their concerns, expecting for the association to take some action. Of course, it can hire security to patrol and protect the community, or it can install community-wide security measures. Some communities have guarded entry gates, which definitely adds an extra layer of protection. But there are communities who may not be able to afford a brand new security system or to hire a patrolman. Instead, the neighbors may get together to organize a neighborhood watch program. And these programs can be effective, but they could also expose the association to serious liability if they're not handled correctly. So our goals for this presentation are to understand the risks of neighborhood watch programs. And to do that, we're going to analyze the well-known Trayvon Martin case and how the facts of this case really changed the landscape of neighborhood watch programs as they relate to community associations. And then finally, we're going to look at the potential cost of neighborhood watch programs to the association if they're not properly organized and separated from the association itself. So to refresh our memories, the Trayvon Martin case, the facts of it are Trayvon Martin was shot and killed by George Zimmerman, who was a volunteer neighborhood watch captain in a community in Sanford, Florida in 2012. The name of the association that this situation actually occurred in is the Retreat at Twin Lakes. Of course, there was a major media storm, nationwide protests, and a highly publicized criminal case against Zimmerman in which he was found not guilty. But the Trayvon Martin's family filed a wrongful death suit against the association. The parties actually settled the civil suit, and the association is thought to have paid out over $1 million to the family, even though the actual amount of the settlement itself has still remained confidential. The family, though, was able to point to the association as endorsing Zimmerman as the go-to person for residents who have been victims of crimes in the community. This information was all found in an article that was published by the Orlando Sentinel. And actually today, if you do a Google search right now with the terms Trayvon Martin and HOA, the results will give you tons of articles about the association's liability and the settlement it paid to Trayvon Martin's family. This can be found in CBS News, CNN, and many local publications as well. Also in the Orlando Sentinel, it reported that the attorney for Trayvon Martin's parents filed this lawsuit in Seminole County. Portions of it were made available for the public to review, but again, according to that newspaper, the settlement amount in all of that information was marked out. Lower in the agreement, the parties specified that they were going to keep that amount confidential, but again, it was thought to have been paid out over $1 million to the family. So let's talk about a little, and actually I'd like to give a shout out to Brady Ortego for coming up with this case study and actually analyzing the Trayvon Martin case that had so much impact on the POA world. The source of all the information in the presentation can be found in actual FBI transcripts that came out during the investigation that contain conversations with related parties like board members, other members of the Neighborhood Watch program, residents in the community, and community managers. So keep in mind all the individuals that had to really get involved in this situation, which is something that could largely have been avoided. I'm going to talk about the contents from the local police materials that they distribute for their Neighborhood Watch programs, and then the publications that they would also give out to volunteers to help the Neighborhood Watch program be successful. And then later on, we'll talk about the Retreat at Twin Lakes publication. So that was the name of the association again. And the things that they put out that really got them into the mess that they found themselves in this case. So again, here's some other goals that I want us to take away, some important points that I'd like for us to take away from the presentation today. So first, we're going to learn about what the Retreat at Twin Lakes did wrong. So we'll use them as an example of what not to do. Keep in mind that the association is not security, and those two things need to be totally separated. I'm going to talk about the right way to create a neighborhood watch program and how it should be structured. And then we'll use that to create a legal defense for HOAs and make it so the association could potentially reap the benefits of a neighborhood watch program and not have the risk. In one of the articles I read on the topic, an attorney was talking about this case, and he said, we've seen instances like this before where neighborhood watch individuals have crossed the line and taken on the role of law enforcement. HOAs have been dealing with this for years in their neighborhoods, and they can't figure out how to structure neighborhood watches. So of course, we know that this is a huge issue in communities around the country. So let's go ahead and dig in. So I mentioned I'll talk about the association a little bit. The Retreat at Twin Lakes was a small community of approximately 263 townhomes. It was also a gated community in Sanford, Florida. I'm saying it was, but it's still a community that exists today. The valuation of the properties in this association were approximately $250,000 before this incident happened. I'll talk a little bit later on about the effects of this incident on the association. It was a relatively nice association, had a community pool. And again, the average value of the homes before the Trayvon Martin incident was $250,000. I want you to keep that in mind later when we talk about the impact on the community. Also, I wanted to bring up some of the events that led up to the incident where Trayvon Martin was murdered. I think it's important that we talk about this too, just so we can kind of see the situation that the association found itself in. So from the beginning of 2011 through February of 2012, it seems that the police were called to the Retreat at Twin Lakes a total of 402 times. Crimes were committed at the retreat in the year prior, which included 8 burglaries, 9 thefts, 1 shooting. And many of the residents said there were dozens of attempts to break in, which had created an atmosphere of fear and frustration in the neighborhood. So it seems that this association really had become quite desperate to try to, incorporate some sort of safety measure in the community. But it seems that the security systems or the measures that they were looking at to put in place had a high cost. And, this is something that we hear a lot. Associations are not willing to either raise assessments or, come up with some sort of way to raise funds so that the community can hire police officers or security companies. So it really limits the options that the association has to manage crime. Obviously, this comes with a lot of risk. But then also in September of 2011, the Twin Lakes residents held an organizational meeting so that they could create this neighborhood watch program, because this was basically what they were left with. And at that time, Zimmerman was selected by neighbors as the program's coordinator and organizer for the neighborhood watch program. And what's, next slide, Lindsay. Or no, actually stay there. So what was interesting about this situation is that the neighborhood watch program for this association really did start up on the right track. Zimmerman appointed himself as leader of the initiative. He reached out to the local police for information on the neighborhood watch program. And what's generally done in that situation is local police will either come out and give a presentation, or they will provide all of the materials that the volunteer group needs in order for them to have a successful neighborhood watch program. In this situation, the association actually gave Zimmerman permission to use the clubhouse for meetings. That'll be important later on as well, because it lends itself to the liability that the association was found to have in this situation. And again, the police came out, they gave a presentation to make sure that the volunteers would be effective. And that happened in this situation as well. Next slide. So these are some phrases that we actually took from the PowerPoint that was given to the community by the police. at the time. So this is the Neighborhood Watch program that they had in place at the time. And some of the phrases that we found there were that the volunteers were supposed to observe and recognize. They were supposed to observe and immediately report. They served as liaisons to the police. And, very specifically, it points out that a volunteer member of a neighborhood watch program is not a vigilante police. So more recently, the Sanford Police has developed a new 38-page neighborhood watch block captain handbook that was published in 2019. And these new rules required neighborhood watch programs, volunteers to be trained, and then the program itself needed to be registered with the department. In bold letters on several of the pages, it says citizens participating in the neighborhood watch program are not law enforcement officers and should never attempt to apprehend a suspect. That is a law enforcement officer's job. So instead of, pretending to be the police, volunteers are supposed to observe, identify, and report. This handbook also contains a table of suspicious activity to look out for, ways to identify a suspect. It's actually really resourceful, really helpful to neighborhood watch program volunteers so that they can have a successful program. It also mentions that block captains are the direct liaison to the police, but again, they are not the vigilante police. They're not supposed to even approach, apprehend people, because that is a law enforcement agent's job. Here's some more information that we got from the Neighborhood Watch program information. This is based on before the Trayvon Martin incident happened. It was very specific on making sure that they're not apprehending suspects, not approaching or getting physically involved. I like this quote that we got that said, "What you will not do is get physically involved with any activity you report. Do not apprehend any suspicious persons. Do not take any risks to prevent a crime or to try to make an arrest." And if you listen to the 911 call that happened at the time of the incident where Trayvon Martin was murdered, the dispatcher is actually telling George Zimmerman not to pursue the suspect. And you can hear Zimmerman on the other end of the phone saying, "I'm going to pursue him." And he basically did the opposite of all the things that he was trained to do. So that's really what got him and the association in the situation that they were in, where they were found liable in this situation. So I want to kind of give us a little insight into what block captain responsibilities are. This is what George Zimmerman was supposed to do as the block captain for the Neighborhood Watch program. So they are tasked with sharing the concept of Neighborhood Watch program with other volunteer members. The block captain should distribute news and crime prevention information from the local police. The handbook that I just mentioned on the last slide has area maps and important telephone numbers and addresses that the volunteers may need. That's already prepared for them. It's just something that they get, that they can have for safekeeping. And then finally, the block captain should relay criminal activity information to the group. With that, we've all been to board meetings where a member will ask a question about crime statistics in the neighborhood, and with good reason, right? People want to feel safe and be informed. But as a general rule of thumb, it's better to have a member of local law enforcement to attend the meetings and give that report than to have the Neighborhood Watch program block captain or liaison or whatever do that, because it intermingles the association with the Neighborhood Watch program a little bit too much. And you'll see from the remainder of the presentation, we want to make sure that those two entities stay completely separate. So again, this is all taken from transcripts, and these are the various perspectives of the Neighborhood Watch program, which ultimately led to the association having to pay out a really large settlement to the Martin family. So a board member in one of the transcripts claimed that the Neighborhood Watch program was a volunteer committee, and it was. But if you look at the management's perspective or their impression, they actually believe that residents supported the Neighborhood Watch program and that they supported the fact that Zimmerman was going to be the representative. If you talk to some of the members, they actually thought that the association started the Neighborhood Watch program. And then the police, when they came into the situation, they thought that Zimmerman was actually on the board of the association. And if you look at this situation, Zimmerman kind of gives you the mindset of an overly aggressive neighbor. This is not really a unique situation or a unique personality. Some of you may have seen this type of personality in your community. You may have a person like this as we speak. So this is real, and it can certainly happen to anyone. But the issue here is that, you can see from the different impressions or perspectives that I just mentioned, that there was a real blurring of the lines of what should really have been a function of the police department. If the association told people to report things to Zimmerman, that's a much different function than what the Neighborhood Watch program really should be, because its role is to actually call the police and report suspicious activity. We even have private citizen police activities where police can go out, or people can go out in police cars and, patrol neighborhoods and such, but they don't go chasing after suspicious people because that's actually a police function. So the blurring of the lines here is really what the major issue was. So where did the HOA go wrong? So in reality, the board did really blur the lines here, and the HOA held Zimmerman out as a leader of the Neighborhood Watch protection or Neighborhood Watch program. And here are a couple of other ways the HOA went wrong. The board asked Zimmerman to be the coordinator of the Neighborhood Watch program. One of the biggest indicators of the board's support for Zimmerman was an HOA newsletter that went out and listed Zimmerman as the contact, which I'll show to you in just a minute. So this is really the whole point, right? If residents decide to organize a Neighborhood Watch program, the association needs to make sure it remains completely separate. I'll talk about that in a second, but the issue that comes up here is, the authority that the association is perceived to have given this person. And it doesn't matter if it's actual or apparent authority based on Texas law. What matters is the perception of Zimmerman's involvement to outside parties. Well, where else did the HOA go wrong? It held the Neighborhood Watch program meetings at the same time or during the HOA's board meetings. This actually sends the wrong signal to other members of the community and may make them think that the Neighborhood Watch program is some official committee of the association. So I mentioned this before, but the better thing to do in this situation is if the meetings are going to be held at the same time or at the same night, then it's best to have the Neighborhood Watch program meeting before the board formally begins or after it formally adjourns the meeting. Then it should make an announcement, or the Neighborhood Watch program block captain should make an announcement saying something like the board meeting is over, but if you're interested in the Neighborhood Watch program, you can stick around. That announcement should also include a statement that the Neighborhood Watch program is separate and independent from the association. And then that way you could still get participation, but it keeps those two meetings and those two entities very separate. Another issue that wherein the HOA went wrong is that Zimmerman was actually given business cards. This goes to the association's liability in the situation because, as you can see, he had an email address that included the association's name, RTL, Neighborhood Watch. So this likely gave off the impression to anyone who saw this that he was affiliated with the association. So here is a copy of the newsletter. As you can see, it went out February 2012. This is a newsletter from the association, and under the heading Neighborhood Watch, the newsletter recommends that residents first call police and then please contact our captain, George Zimmerman, so he can be aware and help address the issue with other residents. So this apparent endorsement of Zimmerman may have been considered by the association's board and council to expose the association to liability in the lawsuit. And then you can see too, the little area where we've got the two red stars there. It has Zimmerman's email address that has RTL in the title, so that shows that there might be some affiliation with the association, and then it has his phone number, name and phone number there. So this is an official publication that's put out by the association. So of course, anyone that read it likely thought that this was maybe an HOA sanctioned committee or something of that nature, but nevertheless, it definitely blurred the lines between the two entities. Another interesting area where the HOA went wrong is this tweet that we've posted here, where the association is claiming that this is our Neighborhood Watch program and how they have led to 4 arrests and burglaries in the community. And it's essentially congratulating the Neighborhood Watch program and George Zimmerman. So this is another instance where the association is endorsing the Neighborhood Watch program, and this is definitely something that should not be done. So we're going to talk a little bit about authority, since I mentioned it's important, the outside party's perception of a person who may or may not be representing the association. So in the Trayvon Martin case, we really believe that all the types of authority, expressed, apparent, and implied, were actually present there. But I'm going to explain a little bit about each one of those and give examples so that we can really see how this applies. So, the reason why this is important is homeowners could collectively be responsible for the association's financial obligations, especially if the association's liability exceeds or isn't covered by its insurance or other financial resources. So then that means that owners could be hit with a special assessment to make up for the shortfall. So in order for us to understand, when this might happen and try to avoid it, we're going to look at these theories of authority as they are in Texas. And as I mentioned here, I think that all of them really apply, but we'll talk about express authority first. And that really denotes that it's the authority which the principal intentionally confers upon the agent or intentionally allows the agent to believe he has, or by one of ordinary care, allows the agent to believe himself to possess. So to the extent that the association gets involved and calls neighborhood watch meetings and those sorts of things, it's potentially at risk for anything the owners go out and do on their own. So some of the things that I just mentioned, like the newsletter and the tweet, those are things that would give express authority. The email address, putting George Zimmerman's name and phone number in the newsletter. These are all things that give express authority to persons who are taking in this information. It leads them to believe that Zimmerman was acting on behalf of the association. Also, another theory of authority is apparent authority. So this is when the power of an agent to affect the legal relations of another person by transactions with third persons. So apparent authority is really determined by looking at the acts of the principal and not the agent. So in this situation, the principal is the association, the agent is Zimmerman. You have to ascertain whether or not the acts of the principal would lead a reasonably prudent person using diligence and discretion to believe that the agent had authority to act on behalf of the principal. So in this situation, did Zimmerman have the authority to act on behalf of the association? Only the actions of the principal, again, may be considered, but representations of authority made by the agent have no effect in this situation. So we're strictly just looking at the principal. And the principal or the association in this situation has to either affirmatively held out the agent as possessing the authority, or the principal has to knowingly and voluntarily permit the agent to act in an unauthorized manner. So again, the newsletter representation of him, the business card, the tweet, having the meetings in conjunction with one another, even if the board never actually formally authorized this neighborhood watch program or George Zimmerman as the leader over the program, it appeared that the board allowed his activity because all of the different publications and things of that nature. And then finally, ratification or implied authority exists where there's no proof of direct express authority, but appearances justify finding that in some manner the agent was authorized to do what he did. So for the agency to be implied from the acts and conduct of the party, there has to be some act amounting to an appointment as an agent. It has to be approved by the association in word, act, or conduct after they have full knowledge of the act. And then also they have to give approval with intention of validating the act. So, the real example that we have here of the association really validating the acts of the Neighborhood Watch program is the tweet that I showed you a couple of slides back where they said, good job for finding, 4 people that are arresting 4 people for burglaries. So this is another thing that we need to look out for, because even if the association, again, didn't formally authorize this, they validated it by, tweeting, good job. So this is what I was talking about earlier, the effect of this on the community, the real cost of the Neighborhood Watch program to the association. Earlier, I mentioned that they didn't really want to spend the money, or they didn't have the money to invest in a security program. The association apparently had been struggling financially before the incident, which is why they opted for a neighborhood watch program instead of hiring some sort of security company, or installing security measures. But if you recall, I mentioned that the value of the townhomes before the incident happened was 250,000. The next year, in 2013, the average value of homes was between 116 to 127,000. So you can see that the value of the homes went down significantly. Now, if you look at the statistics, they have increased, but still, on average, today, homes in this association cost 13.5% less than homes in surrounding communities. Another issue was that the association had at least 10% of it get foreclosed, which was a huge deal, which, I'll go into more detail in a few minutes. But if you can imagine, the association, if, a primary lien holder forecloses on the properties, then the association's lien is extinguished, and it has no ability to, collect assessments. That gets kind of, thrown out the window. And then last but not least, the community morale took a huge hit. So, that's also a big deal, because you want to make sure that the morale in the community is high, whenever you can. But of course, with an incident like this, it had a huge effect on members of the community, members outside of the community. So of course, morale definitely plummeted. And here's some other costs to the association for this particular neighborhood watch program. Of course, after this kind of situation, they were unable to find anyone to volunteer for anything, any of their committees, any additional action taken by the board. No volunteers came forward. Another thing to consider is insurance. So, they had this lawsuit for wrongful death filed against them, and most likely they maxed out their insurance, and probably, even more than that. So if the association is looking to, be insured after this, how much would that cost? It would probably be much higher than it would have been prior to this incident. And as I mentioned, the association was already struggling financially. So foreclosures by primary lien holders wiped out the association's lien, made it so the association couldn't collect on past due assessments for many of the owners in the community. And then finally, we know that the HOA was likely liable to Trayvon Martin's family, but there were some reports that Zimmerman could potentially have held the association liable as well, because he could have claimed that the association wanted him to do this. They wanted him to take on the responsibility of the neighborhood watch program block captain, and that because he did that, this is all their fault. The association couldn't get their act together to hire security, so he did this for them. And, he could potentially have sued the association as well, which would have resulted in more settlements, likely even harder time for them to get insurance. It's kind of a snowball effect after that. So this is, everything that we've talked about, this story, this case, the Trayvon Martin situation, it really shows how you can't control the actions of volunteers. It's very likely that the association, even though they might have known some things about Zimmerman, they had no idea that he was going to take such an aggressive approach in this situation. And of course, the police came in and trained the Neighborhood Watch program volunteers, but we can see from the facts of the case that Zimmerman still kind of did what he wanted to do. This is a repeatable situation. There will always be someone who takes a more aggressive stance, or just kind of goes rogue and does whatever they want to do. It is also common for volunteers to confront suspects, unfortunately. We've seen and heard more and more reports of this because everyone is able to record things. There's always some viral video, not necessarily of, a Neighborhood Watch program member doing this, but just in general, this is something that has really increased over the last couple of years. So we know it's a common practice. In this situation, the association claimed that they were unaware that Zimmerman was carrying a gun. Of course, the association can't tell an owner not to carry a gun, but you don't want your community volunteers carrying guns in the name of the HOA. So, after this incident, the police department in Sanford instituted new rules where a civilian neighborhood watch patrol would not be able to carry firearms or pursue suspicious people. And they also instituted a new community relations unit that was going to be set up to oversee neighborhood watch programs. And so this is the first time that they would have some precise tracking of watch groups. And that was really important because obviously the situation went completely left in this community, in this situation. So they had to really ramp up the rules to make sure that this did not happen again. So ultimately, you should remember a couple of things, and these are really important. The Neighborhood Watch Program does not equal the HOA. It is not the HOA at all. There should be no affiliations between the two entities. They need to be completely separate from one another. The association should not do anything to endorse the Neighborhood Watch Program. It doesn't want to add any information about it in the newsletter, and it absolutely should not tweet about it. If you're going to have meetings for the Neighborhood Watch Program, and of course board meetings, those two should remain completely separate. Any newsletters or any publications put out by the entities should remain totally separate. There should be separate websites and everything, just to make sure that there's no confusion. All of the Neighborhood Watch Program material needs to make sure it has disclaimers on it, that it has no affiliation with the association, and possibly even get an acknowledgement by the program itself that it, acknowledges that it's separate and independent from the HOA. And on its own, the Neighborhood Watch Program should definitely contact the local police department for startup support, guidance, and training. It could consult an attorney who's an expert in community association law just to kind of guide it on, what it needs to do. It should create a process to recruit only responsible volunteers who will follow procedures. Definitely use websites, emails, and other means to keep residents and volunteers informed, but that, website, email, all of that information needs to make sure that it's completely separate from the associations. And then you want to frequently reinforce the procedures, making sure that you are frequently telling the members, do not engage. The goal here is for you to observe, identify, and report. Don't confront, don't involve yourself physically in any situation. You're supposed to just be a liaison to the police and allow the police to, do its police functions, apprehend a suspect or whatever if it needs to. But, certainly no member of the Neighborhood Watch Program should, be taking on a role as a police officer. And then the association has other options too, right? And here are some things that this association, Retreat at Twin Lakes, could have done. They could have contracted out for security services. Of course, we know this can be expensive, but in this situation, look at the potential risk. When they opted not to contract out for security services, look what ended up happening with them. Sometimes associations have really good relationships with their local law enforcement, so they can consult them on how to keep crime down in the community, or what things they should do to make sure that the community stays as safe and protected as it can. And then remember also, only law enforcement should be carrying weapons when and if they're patrolling or monitoring the neighborhood. Indemnity is really crucial in this situation, and also the appropriate insurance coverage, because if you're going to hire a security company, you need to make sure that, one, that the association has its own coverage, but also that the security company also has the appropriate insurance coverage. Because in this case, as I mentioned, the HOA paid over $1 million, which probably goes above and beyond any available coverage for the association. And then finally, make sure that you're not exercising any control. The HOA is not exercising any control over the Neighborhood Watch Program, and vice versa. And then this can even extend to Neighborhood Watch Program members are not exercising control over individuals or suspects that they might see out in the neighborhood. Earlier, I mentioned that we should do things to create a legal defense, right? So if the association is sued, for wrongful death, or, an owner is trying to assess liability against the association, you have to make sure that you can claim that there was no control and there was a non-negligible duty. So as you many of you likely know, in Texas, business owners are generally held liable for their independent contractors' tortious acts. But if the association can show that it did not have any control over the Neighborhood Watch program, which is what we're talking about in this situation, then it cannot be held liable. Because if it's found that the HOA did exert control, then of course the association could be held liable for the acts of an independent contractor or an agent. In this situation, the Neighborhood Watch program, and specifically George Zimmerman. And, you know, it is okay if a Neighborhood Watch program representative shows up to a board meeting. Of course, it's best if they update the community before or after the meeting, as I mentioned, you know, making that announcement that we are completely separate from the association, give the update, we're not affiliated with the association. And that's really only if you can't get law enforcement to show up and make an announcement about whatever the crime statistics are in the community. But, you know, by making sure that there is a very clear separation between the association and the Neighborhood Watch program, it makes it so that the association can defend itself against a claim that it had, you know, some control over, or it had some knowledge of what the Neighborhood Watch block captain was doing. All right, so in closing, you know, we've talked a lot about Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman, and the association. And really, this association would have been better off with no security at all. You know, they definitely miscalculated the cost of a security program versus the Neighborhood Watch program, because it landed them in a lot of hot water. You know, of course, the right security can be cost effective because it definitely protects the association and makes it so that they don't have to, you know, deal with the separation between the Neighborhood Watch program and the association itself. But also, you know, make sure that you get your competent legal counsel to review those contracts with the security companies. When an officer pursues what they believe is a crime, they are no longer a representative of the HOA. They are a peace officer in Texas. So that offers another layer of protection to the association. It was interesting in looking all of this is that this entire situation was preventable. At the end of the day, there's a young kid who died, parents who lost their son. George Zimmerman will never get his life back. He comes up in the media, you know, every now and again, and everyone has a very negative connotation towards him. The association declined, you know, the property value was lowered there. Everyone involved probably wishes that this wouldn't have happened for whatever reason. And really, it's all because the, you know, self-appointed head of the Neighborhood Watch program carried a gun and pursued a person when they were told not to. So really, you know, when you're dealing with your boards, you have to ask yourself, what risks are they willing to take in the name of security? Of course, security is important, but there's a way to do it at a lower risk. And if cost is a factor, then the association should consider raising assessments or accepting donations. If that's not possible, then of course a Neighborhood Watch program is your alternative, but it definitely needs to be done the right way. This is not a security program, but they are just observing and supporting. And if that's something that can't be done the proper way, then the association needs to look at, you know, other security measures. And of course, there are many reasons why associations should avoid formally creating these watch groups and leave it up to individual owners to band together and develop their own efforts outside of the auspices of the association. But for associations that can't or will not distance themselves from the formation of the watch groups, they should definitely follow guidelines that I've offered to you today and consult with your qualified legal counsel in order to make sure that any potential liability is limited. All right, that is all that I have. I see that we have some questions. Let me open those up. So the first one I see is, can the neighborhood have a golf cart to go around the property and call the police if there was an issue? What should we place on the cart? I think that the neighborhood could, but this should be something that's announced to the board or to the membership, right? So I would recommend that at a meeting you say, you know, we've had some issues with security. We're going to have a golf cart just kind of go around and observe and monitor and, you know, make sure everyone is aware of what's going on. And I wouldn't necessarily, this is not a neighborhood watch program or anything like that, but it's definitely just, observing, monitoring the community. So yes, I think that's okay. You don't necessarily have to put anything on the side of the golf cart, as long as you have, expressed to all of the membership that this is something that's going to be happening. Perhaps put it in a newsletter, send out emails or something like that. And then like at a certain date, you can start with that sort of patrol. What if we have a camera security system to view any cars coming and going? Is it our responsibility or the camera company? So it depends. If the cameras are being monitored by a security company, then it's likely the security company's responsibility. But I know that there's quite a few associations that I have that only keep the video from security cameras at the entry gates, a couple days. They might also have like a sign-in sheet or something, if you're just a visitor, but it's not necessary for the association to hold on to those videos because, it could be a matter of storage or anything like that. Can a board member oversee the captain of the crime watch? No, much of what I was saying today during the presentation is that these things need to be completely separate. So a board member should not be overseeing the neighborhood watch program at all. They should be a group of volunteers who are trained by the local police or local law enforcement, and they should remain completely separate from the association. We have an off-duty police officer patrolling our neighborhood. Is this acceptable? Yes. One association I know in San Antonio pay for their neighborhood watch volunteers to attend an annual conference. I think that would be okay as long as it's under the guidelines of this is still something that's completely separate from the association. Yes, we're paying for them because we want them to be a successful program, but it's not endorsed by the association. It's not an arm or a leg of the association. It's just an individual committee within the neighborhood that self-governs. Yes, there will be a copy of the presentation. We'll be posting that shortly after this. I'm going to read this out. Our neighborhood is considering a neighborhood watch program, and we've had the Houston Police Department come out and speak on the issue. One thing we've noticed is that the form to participate ask for very personal information, including social security numbers, arrest information, etc. This information was going to go on our neighborhood safety committee chairperson, not directly to HPD. Our safety committee is absolutely part of our HOA structure. Is there any exposure in the HOA to that? So there's a difference, I think, between a safety committee that's sanctioned by the HOA and the neighborhood watch program, because the neighborhood watch program is basically trained by and essentially under the guise of the local law enforcement. Now, we still need to make sure that this committee that you're talking about, the safety committee, is separate from the neighborhood watch program. And since there is a committee that deals with safety, you need to go above and beyond to make sure that there's a separation of the two. And again, yes, the webinar is being recorded and it'll be posted later on. The neighborhood watch should not use the community name if you think that's going to be confusing to the associate or confusing to anyone else looking from the outside. So again, I mentioned earlier about different types of authority. And if it can be found that the association allowed the neighborhood watch program to hold itself out as a part of the community or excuse me, as a part of the association, or had the name of the association similar to the email address that George Zimmerman was using, then that's too close of a connection. They need to be completely not associated. A different website, Facebook page, and all that is really important to maintain that separation. Yes, it is okay for management companies to recommend alarm systems and cameras. In Texas, we now have a change in the bid solicitation process. So if this is going to be a contract that's over $50,000, then you need to go through the bid solicitation process. Otherwise, it's fine for the management company to make recommendations. Would you recommend that an HOA board member not be on a neighborhood watch program? I would recommend that if an HOA board member can keep those two things separate, then it would be okay, because obviously the board member likely has concerns about, safety and protection in the community as well. As long as the program and the association are just remaining separate, then that is perfectly fine. Can the board reimburse the NYP for reasonable expenses? I would say no, because that creates a connection between the Neighborhood Watch program and the association, and I would say no to that. The retail in the house. Should insurance be required by the individual retail restaurant, the retail owners, and the association? I would say that it's always better to be overinsured than underinsured. So of course, if you have security, they need to have insurance. The retail restaurant likely needs to have its own insurance, and the association should have its own insurance as well. Hopefully I answered that question, Noel. If not, send me an email and I'll dig into that a little bit for you. I have a police officer that lives in the building. Can she address issues as an off-duty police officer, or would she be representing the association? So a person that just lives in the building, if they are agree to do any off-duty patrolling, then that's something that they could do. Just because they live in the area doesn't mean that they're representing the association. I'd be more concerned with the person being on the board, for a claim of them representing the association. If the HOA allows NYP signage in common area, does this indicate endorsement? No, because the material, the signage and everything should say on it that there is no affiliation and no endorsement by the association. Should background checks be done on Neighborhood Watch participants? That would probably be something that law enforcement would deal with. So again, the association and the Neighborhood Watch program needs to be completely separate. From the handbook that I reviewed in the Sanford, Florida situation, the police department has a couple of forms that the volunteers would fill out that had some information on there, where they live, their phone number, contact information, that kind of thing. But I don't think that they're doing background checks, and I wouldn't advise the association to get involved with that. That needs to be something that the Neighborhood Watch program does exclusively. And that's also something I mentioned, we want to make sure that you're hiring responsible people who, will agree to follow the rules and the procedures so that people aren't going rogue. So not necessarily a background check, but you definitely want to make sure that you've got responsible volunteers. We have visitor parking in our garage, which is under camera surveillance and monitored by the front desk. Keys have to be surrendered to the garage attendant. In the event of damage or loss, would we be at fault if we do not have any information about the vehicle and therefore not provide information about it to the police except for camera footage? No, I think, whatever your governing documents say about allowing people in, noting what cars are coming in, things of that nature is what you should be doing. I would recommend that everyone take a deep dive into their governing documents to see what the association's authority is and what their duty is as far as, maintaining safety and things of that nature. I give a presentation about hostile environment harassment. And one of the things that the courts will look at in those situations is if the association had the authority to act and it didn't. So you need to look into your governing documents to see what you're responsible for doing or what that association is responsible for doing and make sure you're doing that. I have a community where the safety committee is requesting the association to buy 4 Neighborhood Watch signs. Is this okay? The association should not do this. The safety committee should have their own signs, because you don't want a situation where the association is buying things for the Neighborhood Watch program, because that could create that link between the two entities that we don't want. If a board member's husband is a police officer, could he respond to situations? Would he be considered endorsed by the board because he's married to a board member, even though he has not been, there's not been a formal request? So I would recommend that this is probably not the best way to go. It's better for, if there's a situation, like say, for example, Neighborhood Watch is out and they see a suspect, they need to call local law enforcement directly instead of, contacting this person's husband just because they're a police officer, because the rules that were given to them by the Neighborhood Watch program, and instituted by local law enforcement show that they need to contact local law enforcement, and it gives all the contact information. So I would stick with those rules where possible. And then beyond the training from the police department during your research, did you find any good quality neighborhood watch program setup references or websites that y'all recommend as using? So of course, this presentation gives a lot of good information. CAI has several articles about neighborhood watch programs that gives good information on, what neighborhood watch programs should be like and how they need to stay separate from the association again. And I would also just, common sense in general helps. It goes a long way in these types of situations too. But definitely CAI, the local law enforcement, and the good sense God gave you. And then finally, I had a question that was submitted ahead of time. Can you have signs that says the community is under 24-hour surveillance or 24-hour watch without actually having a crime watch committee or cameras? Is there any liability on the association? So the answer to that question is no, you should not post signs like that if you're not going to actually have 24-hour surveillance, because it creates liability for the association. In a situation where someone sees that sign and they think there's 24-hour surveillance and then there isn't, that could be a problem. So we don't want you guys to represent that there's something occurring when there isn't. That same thing goes for like fake cameras or anything like that. If there isn't actual surveillance or monitoring taking place, we don't want you to represent that it is. All right, if I don't have any other questions, we're going to go ahead and wrap up for today. I appreciate everyone who came and spent their lunch hour with me. Hopefully I gave you guys a bunch of really good information. If you have any additional questions, you can reach out to me. I can be reached at my email is nhicks@rmwbh.com. I look forward to presenting to you guys in the future. Everyone, go out and have a great Wednesday. And once again, thanks for coming.